Hi, this is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame, and this week I thought I'd do something a little different. One of the things that I like to do when I'm out there producing my own street photography is find intersections. I find that intersections provide me much more interesting material than simply just walking down the street and trying to find just a simple, clean background. I like the sort of unexpected nature of intersections. It's really ripe with possibilities because often you have people coming from two different directions, and there's this convergence that happens at the intersection that I find potentially interesting, because sometimes you can get people coming from the left and from the right, and if they're timed exactly right, it can produce some interesting depth to the images. I selected a few images of my own to kind of discuss some of the advantages I have. I think I experience when I'm working in intersection. Okay, here's a shot that I made with a Samsung NX500. The shutter speed was 640th of a second at f10, ISO 200. Now, one of the reasons I like intersections is that I can often plant myself right at the corner, and people can see me as they're about to cross the street, and I establish my presence there with my camera. And I think what that does is that people see me there with the camera making photographs, but they're not thinking that I'm looking to include them in the frame. And what that allows to happen is that people come to me rather than me having to approach a perfect stranger and try and make a photograph surreptitiously. By allowing people to sort of come to me, and it allows me a lot of time to sort of frame my shot in terms of what my background is going to be, making considerations for light, for shadow. But more importantly, I can start thinking about how I'm going to frame them when they come into the spot where I think they'll be ideally positioned to make a good photograph. And such was the case here at the top of Lombard Street in San Francisco. I had initially gone there as part of a press junket, and we were here making photographs, but there were so many people there. It was just chaotic. And I found it really difficult to make a really clean frame. So out of frustration, I just kind of crossed the street, and I was waiting at this corner, waiting for the group to move on to another location where I thought I might have a better opportunity to make a photograph. But as I was standing there, I saw this woman across the street trying to wrangle with her two kids, and I knew immediately it would make for a good shot. So I positioned myself there right at the curb, knowing that she was going to come directly towards me. I knew almost immediately that when they got to me, I would need to drop down to the kids' level in order to make an effective shot. So all I needed to do just before they were about to step on the curb was basically crouch down and make a couple of frames. I think I only got 2 shots, of which this one is the better of the 2. And I got this great gesture of the kid about to step on the curb. We have the distraught face of the kid on the right. You can see that the composition, I think, is as clean as you can make it, considering all the stuff that was happening there. You get a view of the bay on the left-hand side. You have the people posing in the middle of the street. This car that's making a left-hand turn that's in the frame. Thankfully, it's not a white car. I like the fact that by working the corner, I was able to provide an image with some depth. I tend to try and avoid just a simple wall or mural or something like that serving as my background. I've made so many of those shots that, it really is very difficult to make something interesting that possesses the kind of depth that I'm really trying to pursue in my photographs. And I think this one really accomplishes it because it has good light, it has wonderful gesture and expression. I think it's balanced really very nicely. But it was the whole idea that I was at the corner that really allowed me to sort of gauge what was happening, not just at this crosswalk, but also the crosswalk to my left. I can always go back and forth between the 2 crosswalks to try and determine where the best potential for a photograph is. And that's one of the reasons I like doing that. And if I'm simply parallel to a wall, I'm really kind of limiting my chances, and I'm really trying to, at that point, I'm really dependent on finding a really interesting subject that walks across the wall. And for me, this kind of working the corners I think just increases my chances of pulling off something interesting. Okay, and this is shot in downtown Los Angeles with a Fujifilm X100S at 1/640th of a second at f8 ISO 400. Now, this is another intersection. This is probably one of my favorite intersections in downtown Los Angeles. And I was shooting in the late afternoon light. And again, I had sort of positioned myself there, one, because of the quality of the light, but also because I was observing people coming from the intersection from the right. They were coming up this street here into the light, and that was kind of what I was hunting for. But I was also observing people coming from the left, and I wanted to take advantage of the shadow. So I positioned myself at this corner because of the light, because of the shadow, and because I knew people were going to be coming, walking into the light or allowing me to make effective use of the shadows that were present. And I saw this guy, and he came from this side of the street, and then he just stopped there in the middle of the frame, and he was just like absolutely perfect. But the challenge was trying to get a shot with him just isolated in the frame. And I was like dancing all around as people started moving in and out of the frame. And part of the frustrations of working in intersection is that sometimes you want a clean frame with just a solitary figure, and it can be near impossible just because there's so many people moving in and out of the corner. And that's what was happening for me here. Ideally, I would have loved to have had this guy all by himself in the center of the frame, as opposed to these guys, this person here sort of walking into the shadows. But this was about as clean a shot as I could pull off, which it is what it is. But I still kind of like I like the shot. I think it's interesting because of the light. But again, I like the depth of it. I like how there's a repetition of lines. I love the contrast between light and dark here. If a white car had come into the frame, or if this guy was wearing a white t-shirt, the whole shot would have been ruined. This guy just pops out of the frame. But when you have an intersection and you have light and shadow like this, man, you're increasing the odds of you being able to pull off a really, really good image. And one of the things that I'll do, and if you ever see me out there on the street, is that I'm not just standing there in one fixed position. I'm constantly jockeying from left to right, up and down, moving around, trying to make as clean a frame as possible. And because I've camped out at that intersection, I've already kind of scoped out what the overall frame, the overall composition is going to be. So it's a matter of just looking for the right character, the right gesture, the right juxtaposition of different elements within the frame. It's not just a grab shot where I'm just raising the camera to my eye and hoping I get something. I've already formulated and reformulated my composition by the time I'm finally making my shots. Okay, this is shot with a Fujifilm as well, shot at 1/480th of a second at f4 ISO 200. Now this is shot at Hollywood and Highland, and this is a very, very busy intersection. I teach a photography workshop in Hollywood oftentimes, and we eventually end up at Hollywood and Highland just because it's just awash with different characters and different people, and it's, it is sort of this organized zoo, organized chaos that happens there, and it can be really interesting, but also very challenging. And because I've photographed here so many times, I've always been aware of the lines of the crosswalk here, because they have a diagonal crosswalk here as well. So you're getting people from the left, from the right, and diagonally from across the street. And again, being at that intersection, I'm always looking at the three paths through which people are walking towards me and away from me. And I saw this woman and these kids crossing the street towards my left, and they were just making the light. And the advantage that gave me is that mostly everyone else was already off the crosswalk, out of my frame. So as they started moving, I started photographing when they were midway across the crosswalk. And I was making the shots even though I knew they were still too far, but because I was trying to refine my frame. I was looking especially at the top of the frame, because I knew I didn't want to include too much of the intersections across the streets, because there were people there and I didn't want them to be a distraction. So I was like lifting the camera up and tilting down in order to minimize the potential distractions, and then just following these people as they cross the street. And I was just firing and firing and firing, waiting for them to get closer. And again, just as they step onto the curb, there's a change in physicality because they're trying to step on the curb. And you can see that especially with this girl here on the left-hand side, and slightly with the woman here who's at the center of the frame. But because I was already there making photographs, they didn't think that I was making photographs of them. If I had suddenly approached them and raised the camera to my eye and started making photographs, I think they would have been a lot more self-conscious. But because I was already there making images, I was just an obstruction to them. I was something to get around. And I really like this image because of the connectedness that they have by everyone having their hands in each other's hands as they're moving across the street together, and their expressions. I think the frame really works really, really nicely. And I love it when things like that are happening, because what can happen at an intersection is that people are sort of waiting to cross the street. And if you're already there, you can get amazingly close, especially if it's a lot of people there. And I'm able to create this sort of intimacy with the people there, whether they're just standing there or crossing the street, that normally might not be available to me if I'm simply walking down the street and I see somebody and I move up to them to make their photograph because I want to get really, really close. By establishing camp there, for lack of a better word, people are able to move closer to me, and I can move a bit closer to them, and there's no thought given to it. And even though I have a camera to my eye making the photographs, there's none of the sort of awkwardness that I think a lot of people would typically feel when they feel a camera being directed towards to them in fairly close proximity. Okay, here's another shot made near that same intersection. It's actually the across the street. This was shot with a Fujifilm X100S at 350th of a second at 5.6 ISO 400. This intersection is the exact opposite of the shot that I just showed you. Okay, this is the northwest corner of Hollywood and Highland. And as you can see, there are people who are crossing the street here, and there are also people coming from that diagonal crosswalk and the one to our left. That's why you see some people here coming from the left and people coming from behind the couple. And there are some people coming from our right out of frame who are trying to move to the corner. And this couple had crossed the street, but they had stopped because the crosswalk sign was telling them not to walk anymore, and they were waiting to cross the street. And they just kind of stopped there, and I immediately just caught sight of them. And I'd already been there, and so I just started making my photographs and refining my frame ever so slightly. They were just into just listening to the music together, because I don't know if you can notice it immediately, but they each have an earpiece in their ear, and it's connected to the same device, which I think is in his pocket. It's not connected to the phone that she's holding. So they're both listening to music together, but they're all into their own worlds. He's looking across the street, she's looking at something on her phone, and then you have this swirl of activity around them, which I think is really, really nice. I think they're occupying this space, and it seems like they're the only ones there, and then you have this swirl of activity around them. And because I was there, I was able to get really close, but I was also surrounded by people. And you'll find that when you're really in a crowd, you can oftentimes be pretty close to someone, which under normal circumstances might feel slightly uncomfortable for you or the person that you're next to. But when you're in a crowd, that sort of tolerance of someone else's space is minimized. Even though you have a camera in this particular case, it wasn't a problem for me to make photographs, because there were people there with cameras everywhere. You can see one of my students on the right end of the frame making a picture himself. You know, one of the things about working a corner like this is sometimes the crowd itself can become the background. The shot that I showed you earlier of the guy in the white t-shirt, where I wanted to isolate him on the street, well, this is kind of the opposite. I really want to get all those people within the frame, because it kind of represents what that corner is, what this piece of Hollywood is like on any given day when you have that crowd, that sea of people moving through the frame. But luckily, I don't have anything in terms of the other people in the frame that are a big distraction. We see some other faces there, but we're still sort of locked into this pair in the center of the frame, just because of their placement in the frame, but also they're a little brighter than most of the other elements in the frame. I did apply some dodging and burning in here in order to accentuate that. But the gesture of the way she's holding him around his waist and their relationship to each other within the frame is in complete contrast to everything else that's happening there. There's a level of intimacy, of connectedness between the couple that exists here, while everyone else is just walking. They're just moving from point A from point B, and there's some tenderness that's exhibited by how they are occupying this space together, which I think makes the image work. But by being at the intersection, I often will observe things like this happening. There'll be couples sort of holding each other. There'll be parents holding their hands of their kids as they're about to cross the street. There'll be people sort of adjusting packages or something that they're holding because they're trying to shift the weight before they move across the street. There's all this change that happens, which moves beyond simply someone walking. There's a moment of anticipation, of interaction. If there's some activity going on, like some street preachers on the opposite corner here, you can see some of the signs in the background that people might react to. Man, there's just so much that can and does happen at an intersection like this that it's just ripe for photographs. But it's really important to constantly be aware. Even though I'm in that fixed position, I'm constantly scanning people coming from every possible direction because I don't know where my next shot will come from. And by just standing there and allowing the world to come to me, I'm able to make some really interesting photographs. Okay, finally, here's a shot with my Samsung NX1, shot at 1/500th of a second, 5.6, ISO 400. Now, I just shot this past weekend, and this is something I could never have anticipated. Again, I'm working a corner. I have people coming up the street to my right and people coming to the street to the left. And for some reason, these guys almost bumped into each other. And you can see the attitude of the guy who's wearing the jersey looking at that guy going, "Don't you see I'm walking here?" And I managed to get just this, about 3 or 4 frames, but this frame really captured that momentary interaction that they had on the street. And I love how the guy is just giving the guy on the left this sort of cold steel sort of look with his eyes. And the other guy is just averting his gaze. I mean, you can see how close. They're almost literally touching each other. And you probably have experienced this on walking on a busy street. It's like, watch where you're going. And I think this image really sort of quantifies that. But this is an image that wouldn't have happened had I not been at the corner. And I initially had seen this corner. I saw the light and the shadow. I loved the way the lines of the buildings and the sidewalk helped to guide the viewer's eye throughout the frame. And then I just got lucky that these two people almost bumped into each other and that I got this expression and this completely different body language between the two people. And that's why I love intersections. That's why I love corners. And anytime I'm out there on the street, if I find a street corner where the light is good, where the background is good, it's just a waiting game for me. And I won't simply just walk endlessly up and down the street hoping for something. I'll just go, I'm just going to stay here for a while and see what happens. I hope you found that helpful. So the next time you go out to make some photographs, try working a street corner. See what can happen. You'll find some great opportunities there, and you'll likely find that you can get a lot closer to people than you might have imagined. So I recommend using like a 35 or a 28 millimeter, and that particularly is a very effective choice of focal length, either of those two, and allowing the people to get as close to you as possible before you make the shot will help you to produce very, very different and hopefully exciting and satisfying images. And if you've never heard of the Candid Frame before, it's a podcast which features conversations with some of the world's best photographers from all over the world, from all various genres. Our most recent interview was with Omar Z. Robles. He is a street photographer who also photographs a lot of dance, but he does that often in the streets of New York. And he basically blends the street sensibility of a street photographer with that of a photographer who captures performance. And the the blending of the two is really, really amazing. And he himself has a really fascinating story, which you should check out by either listening to the show on our YouTube channel, or simply download the Candid Frame app, which will allow you complete access to the hundreds of interviews that we produce over the last decade. And if you want to submit images to the Candid Frame Flickr pool, all you have to do is go to Flickr and do a search on the Candid Frame and just add to be added. And I'll be glad to add you. And you can submit images to the growing community of photographers that we have here. So thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you next time.